Things that my British partner used to hear all the time in the United States and absolutely hated. And now that I've lived here in the UK, I totally understand why it's annoying. So I thought I would share them with you guys. The first one is, oh my God, I love your accent. Such an American thing. And for a while, he actually thought people were flirting with him, which they probably kind of were a little bit. Americans have a way of saying this like it's a compliment, but he never took it that way. He was really more annoyed at anything because it kind of felt like he was performing in a movie instead of being like an authentic Brit. And it wound him up something chronic, guys. Besides the fact that it's just annoying to be constantly asked to say things like, say bottle of water, or you sound just like Harry Potter. Like the UK has dozens and dozens of accents, as I've learned since I've moved here. So even though like it's almost just encompassing all Brits under one accent, and that's kind of aggravating. So now I can understand that a little bit. And people do say that to me here. And like, I love your accent. And I'm just like, okay. And then they're like, oh, where are you from, LA? No, I'm not from LA. I'm not even close to LA. I'm on the other side of the country. So it does kind of get under my skin a little bit. So I think I should probably owe him an apology for telling him to just suck it up for all those years. The other thing that he used to get asked all the time, and I actually get asked this all the time by American counterparts, is what's the British obsession with tea? This will definitely get an eye roll. This used to get an eye roll from him all the time. And I used to, again, say, just suck it up. It is what it is, part of being in a different country. But now I'm the one who's doing the eye rolling because I'm like, it's not an obsession, and it's not the only country or other only area in the world that drinks a lot of tea. It is a bit quirky, and it's something that we associate with British culture, probably internationally, but I don't know that it's really an obsession, as I've explained before on this channel. But just in case you haven't seen that or you're new with us, it's more of like a just like a comfort ritual. It's just more of a way to start the day, end the day, process something chaotic, handle grief, or a way to celebrate small wins and just be hospitable and be in the moment with people, right? So asking why is more insulting because it's almost like asking me as an American why Americans drink so much coffee. It's just what you do. Either you drink coffee or you drink tea. It's just part of the life that you've grown up with. It is a little bit weird to me still that it's a few cups a day. I mean, I know people that I used to work with that drank like 5 or 10 cups a day, and I felt like that was a lot. But I think it's just more of the fact that in America, we don't really offer it as a hospitable thing anymore when you go to someone's home. It's more of like, do you want a drink rather than do you want a cup of coffee? But here it seems like British people just always have the kettle boiling or always have a cup of tea ready for you, no matter what life is throwing at you. And it is a lot more sacred here than the coffee culture in America. I will say that. I don't think Americans will ever truly understand it unless they lived here or spend a lot of time here. I've accepted the fact that and come to terms with the ritual behind it and the fact that it's basically just a staple of British culture and you have to go with it. But I can also now fully comprehend why my partner was constantly rubbing his forehead in frustration every time, because it's not like he would go up to people and be like, why do you drink soda? What's your obsession with Diet Coke? Like, if someone said something like that to me, I would be really annoyed. So I can completely understand that now. Anyway, that was just another thing I know annoyed the hell out of him, which I think now has transferred on to me living here in the UK. When people say things like, cheers, mate, but not in a fun way, in like an overly casual or extreme version of the stereotype instead. And it's now looking back on it, I understand why it was cringy as hell. I don't think anything made his back go up more than when an American was trying to be fun and delivered cheers, mate, in this fake Cockney accent that they had heard on TV somewhere. Probably Dick Van Dyke. Let's be serious. That's most likely where it came from. I was thinking about it the other day that it was like me going to London and having some random British person come up to me and be like, howdy, partner. I would feel extremely uncomfortable. I would be like what is it? Third party embarrassment? Is that what they call it? I don't know what they call it. Anyway, I would be really, really embarrassed for that person because I'd be like, hey, because first of all, I'm from New Jersey. We don't say that. We don't say howdy and we don't say partner. That's like a very, I don't even know if it's a Southern thing. I think it's more of like a John Wayne Western stereotype that's definitely died out if it ever was a normal thing in America. It's not about the words because British people obviously say cheers all the time. I even say it once in a while as like a thank you now when I'm out and about in public. But I feel like it's the forced performance of it because I know they're trying to just identify and then get on like a fun level with the person, but it's not a catchphrase. You know what I mean? It just goes to show, I think, how Hollywood Americans tend to be and how non-substantial they tend to be with a lot of their cultural references. You can use it naturally, and my partner would just smile and go along with it, and it wouldn't even be a thing. But when they started to ham it up and pretended like they were in some like Guy Ritchie movie or something, I just think it sounds really, really off. Like when I say cuppa, it doesn't make any sense. It's cringy because it doesn't sound right coming out of my mouth. So, yeah, I guess that's probably why he used to get really uncomfortable about it, and I completely understand that now. Another one is so you're going to become an American citizen, right? This would definitely always hit him like a scratch on a record because it's the assumption that since you live here, you're obviously going to make it permanent. And I think it comes from the American supremacy kind of like, just, they're the best in the world attitude that they have overall. And he never wanted to stay in the US longer than the 6 months that his very first work visa allowed him to. He was just doing it to get it on his CV. I was going to say resume. His CV just, went so that because he was a soccer coach. So when he came back to the UK, that it was, something added, a little added bonus to set him apart from a lot of the other, because the industry is so competitive. So it would set him apart from a lot of the other coaches, but it plays into that whole, the US is the greatest country in the world. And that's complete nonsense to begin with. So I think that it put him in this spot where he was kind of like, okay, you're definitely not someone who's grounded, has a lot of worldly education kind of thing, to just assume that that's would be the natural next step. And it irked him because British people, according to him, don't typically dream of swapping passports out. They travel a lot, but it's not something that they typically think about, from what I understand. You guys might think differently. Definitely let me know if I'm off on that. But it's not always that they dislike America, because I met a lot of British people that enjoyed America and did have plans on becoming an American citizen. But I think it's just that their identity is always deeply tied to being British. At least it was in his case. And citizenship just wasn't a prize for him to chase. He was not gung ho about denouncing the Queen at that time. And it was the Queen, and didn't want to assume, that he was going to have a new identity. And he felt like asking that question just was assuming that the UK was just kind of like a waiting room for the American dream. And now that I'm here, I get that question a lot. And it's nothing that I don't expect, but I do understand that it's kind of a complicated and nuanced question for the person you're asking. And it's really personal as well. And I think most people who ask it don't understand the complexity that comes along with that kind of decision. So now that I'm in that position, I completely understand why it annoyed him. It doesn't really annoy me the way it annoyed him, but it makes me kind of uncomfortable because I'm like, either you're expecting a simple answer and it's not that simple, or I'm not comfortable getting into all those details with you just yet. Yeah, I totally owe him an apology on this one as well. The next one was, no one really watches soccer. The thing is, he was a player and he coached it for a while in the UK before he came to the US. He was coaching kids of all ages, and there was a huge soccer culture, not just like kids soccer, but there was a huge, like, because the United States is such a multicultural country, everyone brings their pastime with them. Everyone brings their fandom with them. So why would you think that no one really watches soccer? Most of the time, these are people who, again, don't have a lot of knowledge outside of the US borders and don't really understand that American football really isn't watched by as many people as they think it is. This one was especially grinding for my partner because he made his living in the industry at the time, and he was like he would just kind of ignore them because I'm trying to say this in a very nice PC way because I don't want to insult my fellow Americans, but how disconnected from the rest of the world they really were. And he didn't want to insult them, but inside he was kind of fuming. And for many British people and people out in just about every other country except for the United States, football or soccer isn't a sport, right? It's closer to a religion, a part of who you are. It's an emotional commitment and a multi-generational family tradition. It's not something that is just like a game that you watch for a couple weeks or a couple months, a year. It goes all year round. There's competitions all over the world. And when an American says something like no one really watches soccer, it's not just wrong, as football and soccer is the most popular sport in the world, but also it's almost sacrilege. Kind of like when people used to say it's just a game, which I have to admit I was guilty of for a really long time, and now I completely understand why I should probably be slapped on the head for that, for that ever entering my mind. Another thing that he used to hear all the time, and this is one that makes me laugh now because I understood it at the time, but now I completely understand where he was coming from. When people would say things like Birmingham, is that near Buckingham Palace? This is where he would question whether or not Americans would ever look at a map or ever even seen a map of the UK. Because Birmingham is like two hours north, was it northwest of London? For those of you who might not know, has about as much in common with Buckingham Palace as Philadelphia has with the White House. Completely different cities, different entities, their own vibe. It's not that I'm like hating on Americans that don't know this because it's very, very possible when you're not from or around an area that you wouldn't know that they're that far away. I mean, people used to ask us what was going on in New York, even though we lived in Philadelphia. They just knew it was both on the East Coast of the US, not that it was like 3 hour drive apart. So I understand that, and I'm not trying to hate on anybody, but I think what really bugged him was the arrogance behind the statement. It gets under British people's skin because so many British people, at least this is what I've picked up living here now, so many British people encounter tourists, particularly Americans, that don't know anything outside of London. Like there's nothing in the UK really outside of London except maybe some castles in Scotland. So I think that that's kind of where he was coming from. And of course, I didn't fully understand it until I lived here. When Americans assume that all British places orbit the palace or orbit London, I think it just shows how central London just dominated the mental image of the UK. And it was because it was the center of the world for a really long time. And it is still in some respects. But it just goes to show how little that they realize the rest of the countries really exist in the UK. So I mean, again, this is something that I just come across a lot now, and I kind of cringe on behalf of my Americans when I hear them say things like this. The last thing is when people used to say things like, I'm half British from my grandmother's side. This is just one of those things Americans say in all earnest. They are trying to build a connection with the person. They really are. They're not trying to be insulting or dismissive or condescending in any way. But now I can kind of understand where that would be taken that way. It just feels kind of unnecessary to add to the conversation while fully conceding that the United States is a fascinating and unique country. But claiming a distant ancestry as part of your identity doesn't automatically bridge a culture gap, particularly when it goes back at least a generation or so or decades. It's like someone saying, oh, I watched The Crown once, so I totally understand British culture. No, it just goes to show the inherent lack of self-awareness that Americans have. Heritage is lovely, and I am proud of my heritage. I am proud of where I've come from, and I always will be. But just because I have some British blood that runs through me from my ancestry doesn't mean I knew anything about Britain or British life until I moved here. So the culture itself, it's just being immersed in the culture and amongst other British people. That's the real initiation of British life. And having a British grandparent doesn't make you British. Now, the only exception I will put to this from my American point of view is if you are an immigrant or if you are first generation, like your parents immigrated from another country, For example, if your parents both immigrated from Cuba and you are firstborn American, first generation American, and you say you're Cuban, I fully embrace that as long as you acknowledge that you're American first because you were born in America. But I can understand that because you are kind of immersed into that culture. I personally give a caveat for that. He wouldn't, but that's just my point of view. And I just feel like that he feels like unless you've really somehow grew up in that culture or become a part of that culture, you can't call yourself British. I don't call myself British just because I've lived here for a few years. I feel like I'm very familiar with it and I identify with a lot of it, but I don't know that I'll ever truly be British, and I would never claim to be. But again, I think that's just a little bit of American arrogance, and that's pretty much what turned him off of being in America long term anyway before he met me. Anyway, those are the things that my British partner used to hear all the time in the US that used to irk him. And now that I've lived here in the UK for a couple years, I kind of identify with him, and I think I need to cook him a big roast dinner to make up for it.